What time is it when there is no time left? Can you think back with me to remember the Wednesday of the week before last? What happened? Not last Wednesday, but the week before. Anybody here know? How soon they forget. There was no time left for waiting anymore, right? Jesus to do anything but act in Jesus' name. Time much like the events of this week, when if governments and nations intend to forsake their responsibilities to their people, God's people will need to go to work to show that God is still at work in our world. When is it the right time for God to go into action and for God's people to act with lives of faith and witness and love? When there's little time or no time left. We all know the answer to the question, why are there deadlines? Because if there weren't, nobody would get anything done. So when Jesus talks about the end coming, he's saying to us that that is every time in human history. And it's not a time for us to go lax or complacent or apathetic. It's a time for us to look to God for the relationship that we have with God. Comes because God has gone to work for you and for me, in you and in me, in our behalf, finally in our place. When the leaders take the responsibility for the well-being of the peoples of the world decide to bully them instead of shepherd them, God goes into action for the people of the world, for nations in conflict, for a world that can or won't even see how we have spoiled the good creation God has given us. There's a lot of hopelessness in the Old Testament lesson. It talks about the great and terrible day of the Lord coming, burning like an oven, when all evildoers will be stubble. Those of you who have been to the farmland know what stubble is. It's dry and brittle, and it burns like gunpowder. Well, there's no time left for anyone on this earth, actually, because no one has lived a life pleasing to God. But in the face of that, the good news is this, that God goes to work. When a broken and torn world cries out for healing, God has to go to work because God is the only one who can make things work. Some righteousness shall rise with healing in his wings. Malachi assures a people lost in hopelessness. In 6